Welcome back to the channel. Today's story carries the kind of whisper that moves through a street like evening breeze. It begins with a young mother who never looked for trouble, yet trouble always seemed to know her name. People pointed at her whenever she walked by, speaking in low tones as if their lips were afraid but their hearts were excited. Nobody ever allowed her to breathe in peace because of the 4 children running around her like small blessings with loud voices. Every day, the woman carried herself gently, the way someone carries a plate of hot food to avoid spilling anything. She smiled when her children played, even though she could feel eyes watching her like she was a market display. In that street, people liked gist more than clean water, and her story was their favorite cup of tea. They shouted different versions every week. Some said she had 4 children for 4 different men. Some said even she had lost count. Others said she enjoyed the attention. But if you looked at her closely, you would see a quiet strength sitting behind her eyes, like someone holding back a story bigger than the noise around her. Her compound was tight, the kind where everyone's business flowed like water under the door. Her children laughed, fought, and chased each other around the corridor, and any time she stepped outside to call them in, neighbors found one more reason to shake their heads. Still, she never answered anybody. She kept her steps soft, her words simple, and her heart steady. One afternoon, the street carried a new rumor. It was said that the truth about her children was about to come out. People gathered in small groups, whispering and waiting like people expecting rain. Even her closest neighbors tried to pretend they were not curious, yet they found themselves peeping whenever she walked past. But the woman kept her calm. She held her bag, adjusted her wrapper, and walked home with the kind of peace that confused everyone. The truth she held was not something she hid out of shame. It was something she protected because she knew the street was not ready for it. And soon, very soon, they would learn that the story was deeper than their gossip. The next morning came quietly, the kind that felt like it was holding its breath. The woman stepped out to sweep the compound, her broom moving with slow rhythm. Her children were still sleeping, giving her a moment of peace before the street carried her name again. Even the birds on the electric wire seemed to be watching, waiting for something to happen. As she swept, 2 women passed by, pretending to greet but really trying to study her face. One whispered to the other, wondering aloud if she had finally confessed the truth they were all hungry for. She simply smiled, not because their words amused her, but because she had grown used to being the topic of every passing mouth. It was almost like background music now. Her first child woke up and walked outside, rubbing his eyes and calling "Mummy." She lifted him with ease, resting him on her hip. The boy held her tightly, as if he knew the world outside was not always kind to his mother. Soon after, the other children followed, filling the compound with their usual noise. And just like that, the day had officially started. A man from down the street approached her. He was the quiet type, one who barely spoke unless necessary. He greeted her and asked if everything was all right. She nodded, grateful for the small sign of humanity. But the moment he left, 2 women nearby began discussing how she must be warming up to him now. The street loved to misunderstand her. What they didn't know was that she had spent years choosing silence over argument. She had discovered early that some people did not want truth, they only wanted stories that tasted sweet in their mouths. She refused to feed them. Inside her room, a folded envelope sat hidden under her clothes. It contained the truth everyone desperately wanted to hear. The truth about her children. The truth about why each child carried a different surname. The truth about the men whose names people threw around like stones. She looked at the door as if measuring the day. She knew the time was getting close. The street thought they understood her life, but they were only holding crumbs. The full meal was coming, and when it arrived, their mouths would be too wide to gossip. Later that week, the compound was louder than usual. It felt like everyone had swallowed a drum. The woman stepped outside to hang freshly washed clothes, and the moment she appeared, the entire place shifted. People pretended to continue with their chores, but their ears stretched like they were made of rubber. Something was moving in the air, something close, something that made even the gossiper stand straighter. Her oldest child helped her carry a bucket of water, trying to act grown. The woman ruffled his hair and thanked him softly. Anyone watching closely would see how much they adored her, how each child found a small home in her arms. But the street rarely looked with that kind of heart. It saw only what it wanted. At the far end of the compound, a woman known for her loud mouth was telling a fresh story. She claimed she had discovered the real reason behind the 4 children and their different fathers. Her voice rose and fell like a town crier's bell, gathering a crowd around her. She painted pictures with her hands, mixing lies with confidence. People gasped, others nodded, and some slapped their thighs as if she had delivered gospel truth. The woman heard bits of the noise, but she kept hanging her clothes. Her hands moved gently, pinning each cloth to the line with quiet care. She had learned long ago that when people were desperate to drag you down, replying only made the mud thicker. Her children stood around her like small guards. They watched the crowd in confusion. One of them tugged her wrapper and asked, "Mummy, why are they talking again?" She smiled at him and wiped his cheek, telling him not to worry. But inside her chest, something heavy shifted. Not anger, not fear, just a tiredness that had no name. Then, unexpectedly, the quiet man from down the street walked toward her again. This time, everyone noticed. He greeted her, then paused as if searching for the right words. He said the entire street might need to sit together soon, because things were about to change. His tone carried weight, something deeper than rumor. People turned sharply, wondering what he meant. Eyes widened. Mouths opened. The gossip froze in the air like it didn't know where to fall. The woman simply nodded. She knew the truth was finally stretching its legs. The sun sat high the next day, bright enough to expose every hidden thought on the street. The compound felt restless, like it had been waiting overnight for something to burst. Children played, buckets clanged, and people moved around with too much energy for a normal morning. The woman stepped outside with her children, guiding them toward the tap to wash their hands before breakfast. As they approached, 3 women shifted aside, pretending to give space but really searching her face for clues. One of them asked a question that sounded polite but carried a sharp edge. The woman answered with her usual calm voice, making sure her children heard nothing that would trouble their hearts. She refused to let her peace depend on people who found joy in turning whispers into weapons. The quiet man appeared again, carrying a folded paper. People watched him like he was walking with thunder in his hands. He greeted her and asked if she would be free later in the evening. She nodded lightly. That small gesture alone caused a fresh wave of noise across the compound. Some laughed, some hissed, others folded their arms like judges waiting for a case to start. Her youngest child tugged her fingers, asking what everyone was looking at. She knelt beside him and told him to focus on washing his hands. His innocence rested on her shoulders, and she carried it with care. When they returned to their room, she locked the door gently and sat on the edge of her bed. She reached under her clothes and pulled out the envelope she had hidden. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the documents she had kept for years. Birth papers. Hospital reports. Letters written by people whose names the street had twisted into tales. Every page carried truth, but also pain she had protected her children from. She packed the papers into a small nylon bag and placed it beside the door. She knew the day was no longer running from her. Evening would come, and with it, the moment she had secretly rehearsed in her mind. Her story was not a wound, it was a lesson. And those who had spent years picking at her life would soon discover they had been shouting the wrong version all along. Outside, the compound waited. Inside, she breathed deeply, preparing for the curtain to lift. Evening arrived slowly, as if it wanted to make sure everyone was in position before stepping in. The compound gathered itself, people sitting outside with cold gari, groundnuts, or cups of tea they were not really drinking. Their eyes were restless, bouncing from door to door like they were waiting for a show to start. Children played loudly at first, then quietly, sensing something unusual in the air. The woman stepped outside wearing a neat blouse and wrapper, her hair tied back. She held the small nylon bag gently, like she was carrying a fragile secret. Her children followed behind her, each one holding the next. The moment she appeared, the noise in the compound dropped. People pretended to adjust stools or fold wrappers, but their attention locked onto her. The quiet man walked toward her again, this time with a seriousness that made even the loudest gossipers sit up. He greeted her softly and asked if she was ready. She nodded. He turned to the crowd and cleared his throat, asking everyone to gather under the big mango tree in the center of the compound. Chairs scraped. Slippers shuffled. Curious faces lined up like an audience waiting for a verdict. The woman stood before them, her children beside her. Her eyes were calm, not the calm of someone hiding, but the calm of someone who had carried truth long enough to know it could not be shaken. One neighbor, the loud storyteller from earlier, leaned forward and asked if she was finally ready to say which man belonged to which child. The crowd mumbled in agreement. The woman breathed in lightly and opened the nylon bag. She brought out the envelope, holding it with both hands. She said she had listened to every rumor, every whisper, every insult, and every wrong name people had thrown at her. She said she had chosen silence not because she was guilty, but because some truths were too heavy for careless people. Then she told them something that froze the compound completely. She said none of the children had different fathers. Every head snapped up. Before anyone could ask, she pulled out the documents, one by one. Hospital reports. Birth confirmations. A letter from a doctor. Everything stacked neatly, shining with truth. The crowd leaned in, confused. The woman's voice did not shake. She said the reason each child carried a different surname was coming next. The street held its breath. A soft wind moved through the mango leaves as if the evening itself wanted to hear the rest. The crowd shifted closer, eyes wide, ears open, every soul waiting for the missing piece. Even the children stopped playing. The woman held the documents carefully, letting the weight of silence settle. She looked at her children first, giving them a small smile. Then she faced the crowd and said something nobody expected. She said each surname was chosen by her, not because of different fathers, but because each child carried the name of someone who had saved her life. The compound blinked in confusion. She explained that years ago, she had been homeless with her first child. A kind old woman had given her a room to stay in for 3 months without asking for money. When that woman died, she named her first child after her. The street murmured but listened. She said her second child's surname belonged to a nurse who had treated her for free when complications nearly took her life during childbirth. That nurse had no family left, so she honored her by giving her name a place to live on. Her third child carried the name of a teacher who had helped her learn to read and write when she thought she was too grown to start. That teacher had pushed her to believe her life could still change. The crowd slowly softened. Then she paused before speaking of the fourth. The street leaned forward again. She said her last child carried the name of the quiet man standing beside her, the very one who kept visiting her in the compound. Years back, when she fell sick and almost lost everything, he had paid her hospital bill anonymously. She only found out months later. She chose to honor him the only way she knew, by giving his name to her son. Gasps scattered through the compound like small explosions. Even the loud storyteller covered her mouth. The quiet man lowered his eyes, humbled and exposed. The woman said none of these people were fathers to her children. They were saviors at different points in her life. The surnames were not marks of shame, they were gratitude written in permanent ink. The crowd sat still, the truth cutting through every rumor like light through darkness. Nothing sounded the same anymore. For the first time since she moved into that compound, the street was quiet enough to hear the rustle of the mango leaves. People looked at her like they were seeing her for the first time. The loud storyteller cleared her throat, suddenly unsure of herself. A few others shifted on their chairs, embarrassed by the weight of their own assumptions. The woman held her children close, giving each one a gentle squeeze. She had carried their names with pride, even when the world twisted them into something ugly. Now that the truth was out, she felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized she had been holding for years. The quiet man stepped forward slowly, clearing his voice. He told the crowd he had never wanted anyone to know about the help he gave her. He said he did it because he saw a woman fighting battles she didn't deserve, and he believed kindness didn't need a trumpet. His words were simple but steady, the kind that settled softly on the ears. A few neighbors looked down at their feet, replaying every rumor they had pushed. Someone asked the woman why she had never explained earlier. She smiled faintly and said people rarely listen when they are hungry for drama. She added that she didn't owe anyone an explanation about her life, but she owed her children a world where their names were not mocked. The crowd exhaled together, almost like the evening had pressed a reset button on the whole street. Some apologized. Some simply nodded, too ashamed to speak. A few children ran around again, their laughter breaking the heavy atmosphere. Then, surprisingly, the loud storyteller stood up and walked toward her. Her steps were slow, her pride clearly wrestling with her guilt. She apologized, not loudly like her usual style, but with a shaky voice. She said she never knew the story was built on gratitude and survival, not scandal. The woman accepted the apology with grace. Her peace did not need revenge. As the compound slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the quiet man asked if she needed help carrying the documents back inside. She nodded, thanking him warmly. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, knowing the street finally saw her clearly, not as a rumor, but as a woman who had survived with dignity. Night began to fall gently over the compound, wrapping the truth in calm air. By the next morning, the compound felt lighter, almost like someone had opened a window inside every heart. People who once avoided her eyes now greeted her with careful respect. Some even smiled too much, trying to make up for years of sharp tongues and careless words. The woman didn't hold it against them. Life had taught her that people change slowly, like water warming on a low flame. She stepped outside to sweep again, her broom gliding softly across the cement floor. Her children played nearby, their laughter bouncing off the walls with a new kind of confidence. There was no more whispering behind her back. No more pointing. Just normal morning sounds, the splash of water, the clang of buckets, the chatter of neighbors starting their day. The quiet man approached her, holding a small bag of fruits he had bought from the roadside. He greeted her gently and handed it over. She thanked him, her smile warm but shy. He told her he admired the way she handled everything, with calmness, dignity, and a strength many people didn't know how to understand. As they talked, a few neighbors watched from a distance, this time with curiosity instead of judgment. One of the women who used to gossip loudly walked toward her with a shy wave. She offered to help wash the children's clothes, saying she wanted to make things right. The woman thanked her but said she could manage. The neighbor nodded, relieved that her gesture was accepted even if not needed. Her children ran to her, tugging her wrapper and asking for breakfast. She carried the littlest one on her hip and told the others to wash their hands. She noticed how freely they moved now, no longer shrinking under the weight of other people's opinions. Later that day, the quiet man returned and asked if she would be comfortable taking a walk down the street with him. She hesitated at first, then agreed. As they walked side by side, people greeted them softly. No one stared. No one whispered. For the first time in a long while, the air around her felt clean. He told her he hoped she knew she deserved peace, not punishment. She looked at him, feeling something warm settle inside her. Not love yet, just a calm possibility. When they reached the end of the street, she realized something simple but powerful. The story that once chained her had finally set her free. The following evening, the compound felt almost like a different place. The gossip had quieted, replaced by cautious respect. People moved with softer steps, talking in gentler tones. Even the children noticed the change, running and shouting, but not with fear of sharp words from neighbors. It was as if the street itself had learned to breathe slowly. The woman sat on the steps outside her room, brushing her hair while her children played around her. The quiet man approached again, carrying a small notebook. He greeted her warmly and handed it over. Inside were messages he had received from people who wanted to understand the truth: neighbors, distant relatives, and even strangers. He suggested she might want to reply, not to argue, but to share her story gently. She nodded thoughtfully, appreciating the care in his words. One of the neighbors, the shy woman who had once laughed at her behind her back, came forward carrying a basket of vegetables. She offered it as a small peace gesture. The woman thanked her, explaining she didn't need apologies or gifts, but that small acts of kindness mattered too. Her children peeked curiously, smiling at the sight of the basket. As the sun dipped lower, the quiet man asked if she wanted to walk down the street, just to see how people were treating her now. She agreed, careful to keep her children close. They stepped outside together, and for the first time, there were no mocking faces, no pointing fingers. The street seemed to have shifted, softened, as if it had finally recognized her truth. People greeted her politely, some even respectfully. A few whispered quietly, but this time there was curiosity, not malice. The woman felt a calm she hadn't felt in years. Every step she took, she realized, was no longer weighted by judgment. Her children skipped beside her, laughing freely, carrying the warmth of her strength. She caught the eye of a neighbor who had once been cruel, and they offered a small, tentative nod. She returned it with gentle acknowledgement, no bitterness, only quiet grace. When she returned home, she sat by the window, watching the street glow under the early evening lights. She thought of the years of whispers, the pain, the unfair stories, but also of the truth she had held close. For the first time, she felt fully seen. Not as a rumor, not as a subject of gossip, but as a woman who had carried her children, her story, and her dignity with courage. The street had finally learned the weight of truth. Night settled over the compound, wrapping everything in a quiet, gentle darkness. The air smelled of damp earth and the faint aroma of cooking from nearby homes. The woman sat on her steps, her children asleep inside, their small chests rising and falling evenly. The street that had once been loud with whispers and judgment was now calm, almost reverent. The quiet man stood beside her, leaning lightly against the wall. He didn't speak at first, letting her enjoy the silence that had finally arrived. She breathed in slowly, feeling the weight of years lifting off her shoulders. Every rumor, every mocking glance, every false story, none of it mattered anymore. The truth had reached its destination. A neighbor approached with a small lantern, the first since the story had been revealed. She hesitated but then offered a soft greeting. The woman nodded, smiling faintly. There was no need for explanations, no need for long conversations. The peace in her heart was enough. She remembered all the days she had walked through that compound, carrying her children like shields against words that cut deeper than any hand could. She remembered evenings when she had prayed for calm, for understanding, for moments like this. And now, here it was. Simple, quiet, and true. The quiet man finally spoke. He told her that what she had done, protecting her children, holding the truth, facing the street with grace, was a lesson for everyone. A lesson in dignity, in patience, in strength. He said the street would no longer speak of her as they once did, because truth had a way of softening hearts that gossip hardened. She looked at him, seeing honesty in his eyes, the kind that didn't need applause or recognition. She realized that the story wasn't just hers, it belonged to everyone who had witnessed it, silently or not, and learned that assumptions often fail before patience and truth. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. The street felt alive yet gentle, the hum of distant voices no longer sharp but calm. She took a deep breath, feeling a lightness she had never known. As she stepped back inside to tuck her children in, she understood something simple and profound. Peace is not given by the world. It is earned, slowly, through courage and quiet resolve. And tonight, after years of whispers and judgment, she had finally earned it. The street would remember her, not for rumors, but for the grace she carried with her children, and the truth she refused to hide.